why transition to IPv6? And the answer is, well, really, we see it. It's inevitable. You know, we're going to run out of address space. We need more capabilities. We know we're going to have to do it, so let's start now. Why spend a whole lot of money to do it in a very short time frame when we could take a longer time and do it more efficiently, economically? And then, you know, the other question was, why transition now? And again, like I said, it takes the government a long time to do things compared to a lot of private industry, private carriers. So you have development cycles within the government that will last longer than 5 years. And I say development cycles, I mean you have systems that are deployed. If you look at particularly in DoD systems, they may have systems out there for 15 or 20 years. So when they're building something, they're developing something, you want to get those requirements in now to make sure that they're in that development cycle. You've got to figure out how to take care of that, because you may spend several $billion putting out equipment and capabilities that you don't want to go back and change in 2 years. You want to make sure that that can last for longer time frames. Plus, the government has a lot of policies and regulations they need to go through that typically take longer than traditional businesses. So, some of the history with regards to what happened with federal government. And there's been history before this, but a lot of the big pieces with regards to transition in IPv6 actually started in 2003 whenever the DoD signed out memos that said, hey, DoD is going to IPv6, will be completely IPv6 capable in 2008. 2 years later, OMB came out and said, you know, that's a great idea. We're going to do the same thing. 2008. 2008 came, and the completely IPv6 capable turned out to be, well, we're going to show we can do IPv6. And they had a nice big testing event that says, yep, all the agencies turned it on, test, and see in a minute, turned it back off. Well, some of the things they didn't have in place previously was things like an acquisition strategy, or a way to tell what we mean when we say IPv6 capable. So in 2009, after a long process, the federal acquisition regulations were changed that says, hey, you know what? Agencies, now you've got to buy IPv6 capable products, and not only do you just buy something called IPv6 capable, we're pointing to a very specific thing that NIST put together called the USGv6 test program, a product profile and test program, that says you got to buy it based on this. And in 2010, that profile and test program became effective. And now what you have is the new administration. Well, it's almost been 2 years. I don't know if I get to say new administration anymore. The administration now have come out with a new memo in September 28th and said, here's the new goal. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So if you go back and you look and say, okay, what happened with the original memo? Well, and I apologize, you may not be able to see some of these slides. I know from sitting in the back, a lot of these didn't come through. So I did post them. So if you have a computer, you can pull it up and you'll be able to see them a lot clearer than what they may seem like up here. So, you know, they had a number of deliverables, a number of milestones that they had to meet, with the big one culminating in June of 2008 for the V6 testing. And so, how did that go? OMB put out a statement that says, yep, we did it. Every agency came back, reported that they did the testing, that they were successful. And reality was, most of the agencies went through, they turned on IPv6, they set up a couple stations, they did a range of testing, mainly pinging, maybe bring up a web page or something like that. They said, hey, we got it, here's our test results, now let's turn it back off. We don't need it. If we don't need it, we're going to consider it a security issue because there's no driving demand to have it on. And by the way, since we didn't really plan to leave it on, we didn't really build it out such that we can turn it back on and it's completely operational. But we met the testing requirements. So bottom line is they showed success. They showed progress. They showed movement that they can do it. So they declared success. And absolutely, that's a great step forward. But at the same time, they didn't do everything in their networks that they needed to with regards to turning on and becoming IPv6 enabled, that they could switch and use it operationally. So you still have road to go to make that happen. So now the FAR language. And I'm guessing most of you can't read that. But basically, and it's in there, and if you have access, I mean, you can go to the web and look up FAR, and you can find it there. It basically says if you're buying IT products, then you should be buying IPv6 enabled products based on the test program. Straightforward. Is that happening today? And that became effective. It became effective in the FAR in December of 2009. It pointed to the date of, I believe it was June 2010, for the USGv6 program to become completely effective. And so then on, you're supposed to be utilizing this in all your acquisitions. And the issue today is that that hasn't been trained throughout the entire acquisition groups, so you don't necessarily see that happening. Is it going to happen? I'm pretty sure you're going to see that relatively soon, because if it's in the FAR, really is a law and a regulation to do that, and it's just a process of catching up with it. So, the IPv6 product profile. One of the first things that NIST started working on once they got the nod from OMB in 2005 was, how are we going to specify and define what IPv6 capable means? And so they came out with a thought process, not different than what the DoD had done in the past, that says we're going to come out and we're going to profile what it means to be IPv6 capable. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a set of things that are must-haves, that you have to have in there. Then you have some optionals, then we'll have ways to update this as we go along. And one of the things NIST wanted to do is make sure that they didn't catch industry by surprise. Or if they did, it wasn't the government's fault. So they made sure to build in a 2-year or 24-month ramp cycle for anything being added in. So from the date that the first draft of this plan or the profile came out, they wanted to give industry 24 months before they made it effective. And they have a cycle of updating this, and as they put new requirements in, they want to give industry an understanding of within 24 months this new requirement is going to be required. It might be a possibility, but you're going to have 24 months by the time we put it out to get it built into your products. And so they broke it up with regards to a host, a router, and a network protection device. Those are the major device types. And then down by functional category. And they have it, if you have a chance to go look at it, you know, it's great, interesting reading. Well, it's reading. And it actually really is a well thought up plan on how to do it. I had some recommendations on, I think, how they could improve it. But I think they've done a great job. And it does a good job of saying very clearly, here's a way of specifying what an agency means by what I want for IPv6 capable. And it allows agencies to be flexible and add in things so not every single definition is the same. We can add capabilities here that we need that other agencies may not, and they can do that in the acquisition cycle. Well, married to this is the federal IPv6 testing program, the USGv6 testing program. And the testing program provides a method to certify USGv6 accreditation labs that are out in industry. And there are 3 today. There's UNH, there's ICSA, and I feel bad, I can't remember the third one. It's an organization in Hong Kong that are accredited labs. Any lab, anybody, company can go through this process. They have first, second, and third party test labs. A vendor can be an accredited test lab. It could be the government can build their own accredited test lab. Or it could be a third party like a UNH or an ICSA. But what vendors are going to have to show is what they call an SDoC, or a self-declaration of conformance, and that's going to have to be able to point back to the tests and the certifications coming from an accredited test lab. This is the only way to meet this requirement. So if you've got an IPv6 ready logo, 1, 2, a new one comes out 3, great, it's not the same thing. It has to have been done through this accredited test lab. And so you'll see these requirements coming out, and more than likely it'll probably shock some of the vendors who are out there the first time out, and there may be a run on test lab space, and that could be an issue. But this will happen, and everyone will get a chance to see how these processes flow, and it'll probably take a while after the first couple come out, but to get things moving. So that kind of summarizes where the federal agency, or where the federal policies are to date with regards to moving to IPv6 up until this last memo came out, and I'll start talking about that in a second. And as we go through, please, if you have any questions, just stop me along the way. I'd rather go ahead and answer them now and do that. Ah, there we go. Stan. Sure. If you wanted to get it accredited, they would probably call it a host. Possibly. Again, if probably, I don't know if they buy them or lease the cell phones, but they probably do definitely buy televisions. So there was a discussion early on in the profile process about, are these enough classes for definitions? And I think the answer was, we want to fit everything into these three. Now, they've got the ability to expand as they go along. It's not necessarily forever defined into these areas, but this is what they have today, and any products that need to be, and again, they don't like to use the word certified because they don't want to call the product certified. Any products that need to go through the accreditation testing will have to fit in those three categories. They do that today. Again, I can't speak on behalf. I can just tell you, so the policy is, if you go out for an acquisition, you are supposed to be utilizing this process. Are they doing that today in all cases? Absolutely not. That's something that has a while probably to go through the training for the acquisition groups, even the program managers, the technical groups. I think that's something that needs to be accomplished. Any other questions right now? Okay, so September 28th, NTIA held a workshop in DC, and we had the federal CIO and the federal CTO lead the workshop. We had a number of people on the panel. John Kern was there. We had Vint Cerf there. A number of people talking about IPv6. Concurrently, the federal CIO released a memo with a new policy on transitioning to IPv6. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh. There we go. And so that memo went through and provided a little bit of an explanation of why are we doing this. And it came out, I mean, very straightforward. No surprise, this administration's very focused on technology. And they are pushing a number of things like cloud computing, smart grid technology, and broadband deployments. And guess what all those things are going to require? They're going to require expansion of the internet, more IP addresses, and oh, by the way, that's what we're running out of. So it's very clear that they understand that what they want to do from an administrative standpoint in moving with their goals requires this. They also made it, interestingly, very clear that they want to eliminate NAT. They want to simplify the network, and they want to get away from NAT technologies. And they want to move back to an end-to-end structure, and they look at IPv6 as providing a good foundation for future IT architectures. And you have people come up in both ways. Is IPv6 more secure than IPv4? A lot of discussions on that. Outside of that discussion point, I think it's probably clear that if you use the robustness of IPv6, you can build more secure architectures because you have more flexibility on how you deploy networks and how you do that in the future. It might not be you just switch them out one for one, you're going to get that value. But if you actually rethink of how you're deploying, you could probably do it in a much better way. And exactly what was being said before, they want the internet to be able to continue to operate. So they think this is going to be critical. So that's the rationale from what was in the memo of why they're doing it. So now the question becomes what and when. First thing, well, and this isn't necessarily the order they talk about in the memo, this is just the logical order to me. First things was procurement. Hey, we put out this FAR language that says you've got to buy IPv6. We said it back in 2005 that all the products you buy had to be IPv6 capable. Now we have new FAR language. We require it now, and again, mapped back to the USGv6 test program. Okay, that's done. All of our products we're going to buy are going to be IPv6 capable based on USGv6. Now, all agencies, you've got to designate an IPv6 transition manager by October 30, 2010. Again, the previous memo did the same thing. They want to identify somebody who is the central point that OMB can go to and say, where are you? That everyone can look at and say, this is the lead, and have that person responsible, and hopefully this chain of command in that agency backing that individual. So now we get to the more interesting pieces. What they've done is they've broken up milestones based on two different categories. One is external services. First thing they want to see is by the end of fiscal year 2012, which for people who don't work with the federal government, that's September 30th, 2012. It's not the end of the calendar year. All public-facing services need to be IPv6 capable and operational in a native fashion. So they've got to use native IPv6, and it's got to be operational. And hopefully that removes some of the ambiguity that came out of the last memo, and they're saying that yes, you've got to turn it on, it's got to work, and you've got to support it from then on. And you still got to support IPv4, of course, but you've got to do this. Well, for a lot of federal agencies, that's from the time someone's appointed to that time frame where they have to have those services turned on, that's 23 months. That's a very short cycle for a federal agency, particularly given that they budget on a 2-year cycle. So they probably don't have budget in place to start doing this. They're going to have to find money from somewhere and then build it into the budget as they go along. And then internal services are 2 years beyond that. So anything else on the inside, particularly ones supporting those external services, need to transition and be IPv6 operational, native v6 by the end of FY14. So they've drawn some lines in the sand. And as long as the administration keeps the muscle behind this, I think what you're going to see is you're going to see some relatively rapid deployment. And the nice thing is now they have the tools. They have some of the tools from an acquisition standpoint, from a testing standpoint. They're further along in understanding the security requirements and becoming a little more comfortable. So now I think they've got all the pieces they need in place to move forward. So now I'll go back to this one. A little bit out of order. A year before, OMB released, had a team of people both from government and from industry put together a roadmap for IPv6 adoption in the US. And so what they did with regard to the memo was saying, hey, there's a lot of great information in here. Here are some ideas and plans and things that you should leverage to look at. So if you want to understand what some of the guidance that some of these transition managers are going to start looking at, I would definitely go grab a copy of this, take a look at it, and see where they're coming from. They're not required to use it, but this will probably provide some help for how they want to move forward. So now, what I'm going to talk about is an example of what one of the agencies that I've worked with in the past has done. And again, these are my observations. Can't talk on behalf of any particular agency, but just tell you, where they've done and where they're going from an IPv6 standpoint. And that one probably is completely unreadable from where you are. And really, it's just a set of pictures to kind of depict what they've done from a network, enterprise network migration over time. So if you look at the VA has an enormous network. They support over 500,000 users in their network, both employees and contractors. They're deployed in obviously every single state in the country, internationally, just an extremely large network. And they're moving through the cycles of how do I move my network to become more veteran-centric. And if you read anything coming out of VA, you see what the Secretary Shinseki talks about, what the CIO Roger Baker talks about. It really is talking about utilizing IT to achieve certain objectives that are going to help veterans. And that's where they want to become a much more veteran-centric organization. And that's one of the things they're looking at from the enterprise network side is how do we restructure this, how do we move this so that we can be more veteran-centric. So, and this transition piece starts back to the 2005 memo and moves forward. So from their transition approach that they've been going through so far, VA's done it from an organic standpoint. They have brought in some contractors, they have used some outside help, but what they did is they actually went and they built an intra-agency cross-functional team across all their different groups. So if you understand the VA, you've got the headquarters group, and then you've got 3 primary business areas. You got the Veterans Benefit Administration, you got the Veteran Health Administration, and you got their cemetery and memorial services. And they've built teams spanning all the groups within that department, so they had everybody coming in and working for that, or working with them and moving forward. And they make decisions as a group. They bring you know, all the different perspectives so that they understand as they move forward what the impact's going to be across the entire organization. Not all departments work like this, so this to me is a very good approach the way VA has been doing this. And so they put in a transition governance structure. They had their Office of Information Technology as the lead group, but then they built an entire structure around how they're going to move forward, and they did it from a policy perspective. They got the buy-in from the senior leadership, from the CIO, and they moved that downwards, so moved that through the entire organization. So again, I think they did a very good job in establishing that, getting the buy-in, and understanding that they needed that help from the senior leadership to make sure this is seen as a priority moving forward. And as VA is doing this, they weren't just thinking about how do I turn a network and make it V6 enabled, how do I, you know, put the firewalls in. Some of the questions they were asking early on is, okay, how does this help me provide better medical services to my veterans when they're in the hospital? What can I do with regards to V6 enabled services that'll let me do things better, faster, cheaper? How am I going to start servicing veterans outside of the VA network? Can I do more home-based services? And they started asking the questions that I think every agency and every organization should start asking, which is not how do I transition, but how do I do my mission better utilizing this new and innovative technology? And so, you know, from the strategic standpoint, I talked about, you know, they got the executive level buy-in. They built the core teams across the enterprise. One of the things that they did is they recognized training was a real requirement early on, and a full spectrum of training. They understood they needed to do an awareness, and so they actually did an awareness video. And if you go to YouTube and you type in VA and IPv6, you'll find a VA IPv6 training video that's kind of an extended commercial for what VA is doing with IPv6. And what they wanted to do is make sure that they got that message out to the 300,000 plus VA employees and the 200,000 plus VA contractors to help them understand what they're doing. And I think they're going to probably do some more of these as they go along, but it's a great way to get that awareness up. And then at the same time, what they did is they actually focused, and you know, one of the things VA did is not only internally to the VA, they were working with the federal CIO working group and helping take leadership roles. And one of the roles they did take a leadership perspective on was training. And so they built training programs that they utilized within VA and offered out to other federal agencies for training their people, their technical people particularly, on moving to IPv6. So they went in and built an entire training curriculum to offer those services. And then the other thing that they, and then also they had a strong testing focus. They wanted to make sure everything was in place as they rolled it out. And then security. You know, everyone's heard about issues with VA and security in the past. One of the things they really focus on is security and protecting veteran privacy, employee privacy. So that was one of the paramount things as they went through the transition process. And the other thing they wanted to make sure they did was collaborate. Again, they worked not only within the agency, but working cross agencies, working with the Federal CIO Council. They put together working group teams with other federal agencies so that they were sharing results and getting lessons learned along the way. I'll show you some of the cross-agency testing that they've done. And they also became a very active member in the Internet 2 community because they saw the value in reaching out to that research community and pulling in their knowledge, not only for a V6 perspective, but actually from a wider overall health IT perspective. So one of the things that the VA did is they helped lead what was called the multi-agency IPv6 testing. And that brought in VA, GSA, NIST, Social Security Administration, and IRS. And they set up this five agency interoperability testing. Well, I call it interoperability testing. But again, setting up and doing the cross-functional to cross-agency testing. And I think they had one or two vendors in there helping them out along the way as they did that. But this was the largest testing group that got together in the federal government, and they wound up showing this functionality across. And again, you may step back and say, okay, well, they just did a couple pings, they did a couple other things from maybe an HTTP perspective. But this is actually pretty big for the federal government to get together and do these type of things. You don't see that too much. A lot of times, agencies kind of go off and do their own thing. So I thought this was a great cross-agency collaboration experience. And so, as VA went forward, they were designated as a level 1 agency for the IPv6 transition. So, and this is kind of the accomplishment as they were going along. So they are one of the major departments. They were rated 5 out of 5 for several years in a row as they were going through the transition. And if you're not familiar, basically at the time, OMB was giving grades, and there was 1 through 5, and 5 was the best with regards to how agencies were doing at different efforts. And it wasn't just V6, there was a number of different efforts for enterprise architecture and a couple other things. But they were always top of the mark for V6. They did their successful core network testing. They led the multi-agency test bed, talked about the awareness video that got that out there, not only for VA, but for other agencies as well. They provided the training leadership, and they're definitely acknowledged within the federal community and some of the other communities as a leader in the V6 area. So some of the lessons learned that came out of this. One is start early. And I think that's probably, you'll find a lot of these lessons coming from many of the different organizations, which is, don't start when you need to start. Start whenever you have extra time, because you're always going to run into different things and different roadblocks. Be inclusive. The more you include different parts of your organization, the better off you're going to be. You don't want to get down the road, be 75% complete, and find out that you forgot something, or that you missed something, or what you're doing is going to mess something else up, or that there's a major development going on, you didn't get the requirements in there. So make sure you spread out and you become inclusive. Executive level buy-in, critical. Nothing says that you can't start with sandbox efforts, and there's a number of success stories that you can leverage from that. But I think, particularly from a federal perspective, getting that executive level buy-in is going to be critical as you go forward. A lot of times, that's where you can get the budget cover, that's where you can get the funding pieces you need in place, and that's where you can get people who may become roadblocks to get moved because you have that CIO or that higher level push. Training, absolutely. That's another critical area, making sure that you have not only your technical people trained, but you have groups trained along the way. In a federal environment, training your acquisition officers, critical if you want to get the right V6 equipment in place. Making sure you have your technical program managers trained, absolutely. And then test. I've heard this from so many different organizations doing V6 transition, and it's absolutely true. Test, test, test. You're going to get equipment in-house, and it's probably a lot better than it was in the past, but a lot of the vendors haven't gotten a tremendous amount of feedback from the V6 features, and you need to go through, test those things, make sure they work. And not only test the V6 side, but make sure when you put the V6 stuff in, you're not breaking something on the 4 side. And then the next steps. So obviously VA is gearing up to go and work with the new memo that came out. But some of the things that they're looking at now is really planning for their phase 2, what they're calling the phase 2 activities. Understanding the gaps that they have, fixing those gaps. Moving forward, they want to continue the collaboration process, still working cross-functionally with different agencies. Starting to build V6 into the business cases. So this isn't just kind of an effort that you pull out and you have one group doing this. Now they need to make sure that everything gets permeated in through all the different development efforts that are going on. So as they have new systems coming out, that the requirements are in there. And it's not just the V6 transition lead trying to say everything. It's the technical program managers and the different groups that are working those in. And then one other thing that they're working on is establishing a demonstration network. They've been doing this in different areas with I2 and some other capabilities, but really putting up the ability to show new innovative technologies. V6 is one of them. They want it to be a core part of that. But something that VA does really is bring in some research, different thing that's happening in the academic community to help veterans, primarily from a health IT perspective, or from a health perspective, but trying to see how they can utilize those new technologies to reach veterans better.